Hi, this is Eric from Cafe Watercolor. Thank you for joining me in this new painting video. Let's jump into it. So this beautiful girl is Emily. I found her on Instagram through my friend, and I saw this photo of her on Instagram, and I saw just such a beautiful girl, and she's drinking coffee, which is my favorite drink, so you just can't beat that picture. So I decided to do a portrait of her holding this coffee mug. So whenever you have this beautiful subject like these, at least for me, the first big temptation is just to try to copy everything that I see because it's so beautiful and I can get a little bit afraid to change what I see. So I will try to copy everything one to one. But of course, for me, that's a very bad idea because I am not a photorealistic painter. There are some artists who can do that very, very well, but I am just not one of them. So I usually need to step back and really think about how can I reiterate this in my own way. So it kind of shift away from the original photo and become its own scene, become its own entity, while still being somewhat loyal to what the subject has to offer, to still convey, to capture the feeling of the subject. We'll come back to this a little bit later. So the first very important thing is to do a proper drawing. So I usually start out by doing some fast, loose, long lines and try to just get the basic gesture of the head down, and then I start to go into a little bit more detail and draw out the features and everything. So the most challenging thing is to get the proportion and the likeness right. I am not a natural when it comes to drawing, so I usually spend a little bit more time trying to get everything right. So even though I think I can do decent portrait, I really think I spend more time than I should. Anyways, I think practice makes perfect, so I will just try to practice more. Hopefully I will get better at it and I can do a little bit more live painting demos with portrait in the future. All that being said, I think this portrait is actually not that difficult because a good portion of her face is covered with the coffee mug and her hair. So I just really need to get the feature right and the likeness right. And the only thing that's a little bit tricky is the hand, like her hand holding the mug in a certain way, and there's some foreshortening of the finger and the hand. And I also need to watch out for the proportion, the scale between the hand and the face. If I make the hand too small or too big, it's going to look weird. So right now I'm pretty much just cleaning up the line work, erase away some of the construction line I did in the beginning and try to draw a little bit cleaner with some darker lines. So whenever I'm painting a portrait, my drawing usually is a lot tighter compared to like a landscape painting because human face is something we see every day. So if something is off, people will be able to spot it, even though if they cannot tell you exactly what is wrong with the portrait that we paint. If the proportion is wrong, something is off. And at the same time, we're trying to capture the likeness. So if the likeness is not right, if this person doesn't look like Emily at the end, then I'm not doing my job right. Especially if it is a commission portrait that somebody hired me to do. The client usually want me to paint somebody that means a lot for them. So if the painting turns out not to be the person they remembered, then something is wrong. They're not going to be happy. So even though I really enjoy doing portrait, there's a lot of stress behind it. But I really love it, so I will continue to do it. Hopefully I will get better at it. So I'm done with the drawing, so here comes the first wash. I apologize I didn't record the palette this time because it's still early before I had that set up. But what I do is I do an overall wash for the face and the hand. So the first wash is usually very light, and I tend to go a little bit redder because the flesh tone is more pleasant when it's a little bit more red. Even though in the photo there's a lot of warm tone like a yellow tone to it because of the light, if I do that in my painting, it's very easily the skin will go yellow and even a little bit green, and that's not a healthy looking skin. So I decided to do the hair in the first wash as well, and I play with a little bit of color. So I add some cerulean blue in the hair, just try to loosen things up a little bit. And you see me adding a little bit of water to the lip. That's because I don't want a big hard edge on the hair just yet. And even in the photo, her hair is a little bit thinner. Out there it's a little bit more fuzzy, so I add a little bit of water to soften the edge. So the first wash is dry. I started to paint my second wash, which I usually start with the eye. So painting the eyelashes and the eyelid. And I try to connect the shape. So even though I am painting her eyelashes, I try to connect that and kind of expand that out into a shape of her eye socket. So having a little bit of shadow and shading and things like that. And I try to soften the edge wherever I can so that we don't have a lot of unpleasant hard edges. So I paint the eyebrow, and again, you will notice that I soften the edge of the eyebrow a little bit so that it blends into the skin tone. One of the things that is really important is that you don't paint the feature out as is. What I mean by that is you don't want to paint like individual shapes and individual features like eyes and stuff. They need to belong to the face. Here I decided to just go a little bit bolder, and I add a big blue there just so that we can play with the color a little bit. So I get a lot of inspiration when it comes to color, when I get a lot of inspiration with Charles Ree's painting. So he's one of my favorite artists. He's also sort of a silver lining to me because he is a living proof that you can paint a portrait that's not very photoreal but still looks really good. So I'm always trying to look after him and try to paint not exactly like him because he paints a little bit more abstract than I do, but I do inspire by him a lot. So I'm painting the nose. I try to make the nose a little bit redder so it projects out. But again, you'll see me soften edges here and there. You don't want a lot of hard edges, especially on the female girl's face. You want still to have some of those softness of a young girl's face. And I'm painting her lips. She got these wonderful, beautiful eyes, so that's something that I really try to capture. So I try not to paint a lot into her eyes, keep them transparent, just like the photo. So while I'm waiting for the eye, the nose, and the mouth to dry, I start to bring that value from the eyes over and start to paint her hand. Her hand is definitely not the focus of the portrait, so I am not going to do a very detailed painting on that. What I do is I suggest some value, and by introducing some value differences, you will be able to see the form. And typically when there is a soft edge, it suggests that the form is turning. So whenever there's a finger, I try to put some soft edge in the bottom, so it will feel like the form is turning. You can start to see the dimensionality to it. And because of the foreshortening, it can be a little bit hard to tell the hand, let alone painting it. So I just try to separate them with value as much as possible. But at the same time, not everything needs to be defined so literally. If it is readable that she is holding a coffee mug with her finger poking up and stuff, and I think that's good enough. So her right hand, this is a very kind of tricky part because there's a little bit of bounce light under her. So the inside her palm is actually pretty well lit because of all the bounce light. So I decided to make the palm of her hand on her right hand a little bit darker, just so that we can have a little bit more form reading. Okay, now the second wash is dry. I go back to her eyes. I start to define it just a little bit more. Give it some punches here and there to make her eyes pop out just a little bit. But again, very, very important, you don't outline the eye. Okay, this is not drawing cartoon. You are defining the form. A little bit of blue in the shadow that cast by her hair, just to offset all the warmth. And the cast shadow should be following the form of her face. This cast shadow is very subtle. It's just casting by her hair that's covering her face. But a little bit of that actually helps a lot to give that more dimensionality to her face and her hair. So to read the form well is all about defining the lighting that you see. Finishing up the eye, give it just a little bit more punch so her eye really sparkle out. Like I said, I think the eyes is definitely my favorite part of the portrait, so I really try to spend some time not just painting but really think about how do I define it. So I personally really like that blue spot that I put in earlier. I know it might look weird for some people, but I actually really like it. I think it makes the painting a little bit more interesting to look at. And I also think that kind of reflects her personality quite well. I mean, I don't know her that well personally, but every time I see her on her Instagram, she seems to be really energetic and has a lot of energy and very colorful. So I'm defining her nose and also her face. And you notice that in the photo, the right side of her face is in a lot of shadows. While I try to have a little bit of shadow casting from her nose and give it a little bit of shading under her cheek, I try not to have too big of a contrast on her face. It's just a personal preference that I usually don't like to paint something too contrasty on a female face, because the more contrast I paint, the darker that I paint in, it's going to get a little bit more dirty when I'm putting down more pigments. And usually I'm trying to keep things a little bit more transparent. Sometimes I use value and contrast very sparingly when it comes to portrait, especially in watercolor. I try not to paint everything really dark because it just kind of go against the nature of watercolor, which is transparent in nature. And I don't think you always need a lot of contrast in the portrait for the form to read. I can just have a little bit of value changes and you can already read the form. Now I'm trying to paint the hair, like the shadow of the hair. We do need a little bit darker areas so that the face will start to look a little bit brighter. I mean, if you look at the photo, even though her face has a lot of shadow, inside her hair is actually a lot darker. So we do want that sort of darkness there just to anchor the portrait down a little bit. So I'm painting her hair and I'm adding a little bit more blue there just to keep things a little bit more loose. I like to play around with color whenever I'm doing portrait, and I think the safest place to play with color is the hair, because as long as the value is right, it will look fine. So I do try to define the hair a little bit, but at the end of the day, I am not somebody who has the patience to paint every single hair strand, so I usually treat it as a group and a big shape. And especially in this portrait, since I am not able to do a photoreal painting, I will just keep myself to the other side of the spectrum, which is a little bit more abstract, a little bit more free and more expressive. So I'm continuing her hair down, and as you can see, I'm just kind of having fun painting the shape. And there's a huge disconnection between the face and her neck area because the mug is in front of that. And this is not oil and acrylic. I can't just paint through the mug and paint the white back. So I'm trying to use the same color as I use for the face, but at the same time, under the mug for her neck and body, I will just try to keep it loose. So I'm painting the mug right now. So this is the first wash of the mug, so I'm just trying to give it like a basic tone. I'm not going to leave it white, even though it is white. But if you look at a photo, only the highlights are almost pure white. The rest of the mug, there's still a little bit of tone to it. I'm painting her sweater. What I do is I wet some area randomly first, and then I paint those knits with the tip of my brush. So it will have some interesting edges, hard and soft edges kind of just playing off each other. I come back to her nose a little bit. I make it just a little bit more prominent. And now the mug wash is dry. I am starting to continue to paint the mug, to paint the second wash in. So a very important thing I need to do is to make the hand feel like it is resting on the mug. So I need to paint a little bit of shadow. What I like to call the contact shadow is something when you touch something, you're blocking off the light there. So having a little bit of contact shadow from her finger to the mug, that is very important for it to read. So now it feels like her hand is actually touching the mug, is making the contact shadow. So what I like to do is I paint a dark mark next to her finger, and I use like a semi-dry brush to soften the edge. I'm defining her palm of her hand a little bit more, just to give it a little bit more volume. And down here on the hair, you can really see I'm trying to deviate myself from the original photo. As long as the value and the form looks right, I'm good with it. And it's still very, very important when you're doing painting is to have a little bit of fun. Don't be obsessed with the final outcome all the time to really stress yourself out. Really do have a little bit of fun sometime. If you don't enjoy the painting process, then you might not even want to paint at all if it stresses you out, right? So even if the final painting you're not really satisfied with it, as long as you still enjoy the process, I won't say it's wasting time because you learn something from the experience. And second of all, you enjoy the process. So I think it's very, very important that you enjoy what you do. Now I'm painting another layer for the mug. This time I paint half of it and I soften it with water. So it has a subtle, soft edge transition from dark to light. So that little value transition helps the form to read. I also skip a little bit to give it a little bit of highlight, which is also the reflection of the environment. Now I'm painting the background. I actually like what the background is in the reference photo. I like how there's a little bit of view of the window outside, so I decided to do the same. And I actually really like the bokeh and the photo, which is the blurry background, so I'm trying to do the same here as well. So a lot of wet on wet, trying to put out some soft edges, soft shape in the background. I really like that yellow light bokeh, so I'm trying to replicate that as well. So leaving a little bit of the highlight in the middle, and I just go back in with the yellow and let the paint spread out naturally. And the background comes down to her shoulder, and I try to retain a little bit of that. So the other side, the same thing. I try to paint the color of the wall, but they are very light and transparent, so it feels like she is in some sort of an environment, but I really don't need to define that much. here we have it. I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you like this painting. If you like this video, please like and subscribe if you haven't. You can also go to my website at cafewatercolor.com. Sign up to download my free watercolor ebook. Thank you, and I will see you again next time.